The night Elena turned 21 began like any other milestone in her neatly ordered life. The skyline of her city shimmered outside her small apartment window, splashes of gold and amber dancing against the dark like distant constellations. Her best friend, Mira, insisted on celebration. Soft music, paper streamers, a modest cake, and a single candle that burned brighter than the moment felt. Elena laughed when Mira sang out of tune. She closed her eyes to make a wish, like tradition demanded, and she whispered it silently, believing adulthood would bloom gently for her. What she didn't know was that fate had already written her name in ink far darker than candles could illuminate. The moment she opened her eyes the next morning, destiny announced itself without knocking. The air felt unfamiliar. Cool, perfumed with expensive oud, layered with crisp silence rather than the city chaos she was used to. The ceiling above her was high enough to mock ordinary dimensions, crowned with a chandelier that glittered like frozen rain. Heavy curtains framed windows taller than entire walls, allowing sunlight to spill in dramatically as if even the sun followed rules here. Elena sat upright, pulse racing, breathing shallow, confusion rippling across her face like wind distorting calm water. This was not her apartment, this was not her life, and that was precisely when a low, composed voice reached her, smooth, calm, restrained not in emotion but in volume, carrying power like thunder kept politely distant. "Good morning, little one," the man said, not raised, not rushed, only certain. "Don't look like you woke up in the wrong universe. You are exactly where you were meant to be." He stepped into the light. Damien Moretti. Even if Elena had never heard his surname before, the world responded to it long before words formed around it. He wore a black suit that looked stitched by discipline itself, sharp lines, soft fabric, elegant arrogance nobody needed to say aloud. His presence didn't explode. It expanded slowly, occupying space like gravity occupies air, without permission, without apology. His face was calm, sculpted beauty, but his eyes were chapters already moving, measuring, assessing, quietly rewriting her world's metadata. Elena's voice came as a whisper because shock numbs lungs before it numbs minds. "Who are you?" Damien paused, not in hesitation, but placement. "The one you called by accident last night," then tilted his head slightly, voice lowering further, not to intimidate but to seal attention gently. "And now your story belongs to me." The candle she blew out hours ago marked the moment she unknowingly dialed a number belonging neither to family, nor friends, nor lovers, but to an empire that listens silently when innocence contacted shadows by mistake. She didn't remember darkness touching her or being dragged through it. She remembered only fragments. Dialing at midnight when exhaustion blurred digits, the phone ringing longer than it should, a man answering without greeting like urgency was already assumption. There had been no threats, only tone, soft and inevitable. She assumed it had been a wrong number, apologized, disconnected, and went to sleep believing endings are abrupt when mistakes are forgivable. Mistakes in Damien's world are invitations. Elena stood cautiously from the massive bed that swallowed her like an apology wrapped in silk. The carpet beneath her barefoot feet was soft as secrets, expensive, quiet, deceptive. She took her first steps not toward escape, but orientation, recognizing instantly that a gilded cage never resembles chains, it resembles luxury distributed carefully enough that struggling feels rude rather than urgent. The mansion staff moved like they existed in muted orbit, uniforms immaculate, footsteps soundless, eyes respectful, but not curious, because curiosity questions power and questions don't survive long in dynasties built on silence. An older woman named Angela placed breakfast before Elena on a polished marble table large enough to embarrass vulnerability. Angela's face was warm, but her world was coded. Loyal to rules, designed to serve without asking why the rules exist. Elena nodded politely, because politeness is reflex before rage gets diagnosed. Across from her sat Damien, cutting toast at a slow, rhythmic tempo like truth itself was a knife he never sharpened loudly. He looked at her gently with calculated calm, not affection yet, but ownership, shaped as diplomacy. "You're under my protection," he said. The sentence sounded like safety until she replayed its grammar in her mind and found no exit clause attached. Mira knew something was wrong, long before Elena knew something was dangerous. Mira tried calling her phone repeatedly. No signal, no ringtone, only empty, unreachable tones. That absence startled Mira more than theories could. Elena always sent good morning gifs, like sunrise demanded emoji etiquette. But today, the sun rose without receiving its usual message. Mira began searching digital corners Elena didn't know existed. Rumor threads about disappearances of girls on their 21st birthdays near elite urban districts. Stories that dissolved without resolution. Families that stopped talking after daughters vanished into arranged alliances disguised as business contracts that didn't involve weddings, but vows. Mira found no ceremony, no analytics, no hashtags, only pattern recognition. Women of age 21 disappearing into legacy empires, returning only emotionally inaccessible, or returning not at all. She didn't know names then. Damien knew age clusters and emotional compliance percentages without opening dashboards. Elena finally asked a question that even stone listens to when spoken softly enough. "Can I go home?" Damien didn't answer immediately, not to deny, to define pacing. "Yes," he said calmly. "But first you must understand the price that already started protecting you before you woke up in it." Elena shivered, because truth when spoken softly travels colder through blood than threats that yell. Damien explained nothing about intimacy or explicit exchange because explicit romance was never his war. His war was narrative possession, clean, silent, inevitable. Pakistani cities adopt power differently, but power itself migrates fluently, he said. "My family didn't come here for weddings or love rituals," he continued internally. "We came for territory that responds to silence rather than rebellions that scream." He didn't tell her that aloud, because dramatic revelations are edited to arrive when requested, not when feared. He watched her carefully instead, not her body, her reaction metrics, her breathing alignment, her voice softness, her defiance temperature, because clean romance mafia empires fall hardest when a woman fears less loudly than she fights inwardly. "It wasn't random," he said gently. "The call you made by mistake last night wasn't your capture. It was your selection. Nothing obscene happened. That was the frightening part. What happened next?" A guard named Matteo opened a balcony door gently for her, because soft doors lead to realization faster than locked ones lead to resistance. Elena stepped into the balcony where the city lay stretched below her, not a world she could claim today, but a world she belonged to yesterday without question. The air felt freer here, but freedom sometimes tastes like witnessing distance rather than reclaiming it. She breathed deeply, eyes moist not because of romance yet, but awakening. She whispered into the morning breeze, "Your mansion may hold my location, but it doesn't own my willingness." Behind her, Damien listened. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like imprisonment. It felt like a man gently memorizing defiance. Because defiance, when soft, is romance's favorite heirloom in stories written for video narration, not adulthood birthdays. The morning felt fragile, not final. And fragile mornings in mafia romances convert safety into love only after the heroine demands permission from herself first. Elena leaned against the balcony's stone railing gently, staring outward, silently scripting her confusion into clarity. Damien didn't move toward her, because Nina-style storytelling measures proximity not by physical distance, but emotional timing. He watched from the doorway calmly, because even powerful men know romance becomes deeper when protected without forced proximity, when guarded by surnames but not touched by them without narrative consent. Damien Moretti promised to protect her, but selection always comes with cost. In his universe, love is gentle, possession is silent, protection is inherited, and women walk into destiny without chains, only carpets soft enough that escape is postponed until truth settles softly in the heart. Elena always believed silence was harmless, until she met a man whose silence was vocabulary, law, warning, and architecture all merged into one. The first morning in Damien's mansion had ended without an ending, just a pause long enough for her pulse to calm from poetry into comprehension. Now began the part where truth didn't slam. Truth sat beside her gently, crossed its legs, and waited for eye contact before speaking. Damien allowed her space, not because space meant freedom, but because space meant observation. He knew something that Elena didn't yet fully allow into her understanding. Fearful people run, but emotional thinkers negotiate. And negotiators are easier to guard than runners are to chase. Elena was not running, she was decoding. And decoding delayed panic longer than panic delayed decoding. The mansion itself felt like an expensive paradox, welcoming, intimidating, grand, calm, lavish, and emotionally minimalist, designed to soften resistance by erasing chaos. Guards stood like statues who had subscriptions to loyalty rather than salaries. Maids floated like satellites, carrying cutlery instead of questions. Hallways stretched like paragraphs Damien edited personally, and windows were taller than doors, because visibility matters more than exit when power wants allegiance before affection. Elena noticed everything, which meant she feared the aesthetics less and the implications more. Because smart women don't panic at decor, they panic at the contract hidden inside the decor. Damien met her again in the study, a room that smelled like legacy, leather-bound decisions, international dominance, and restrained emotion. He sat behind a walnut desk that looked older than civilization's apology letters, lined with calligraphy of imported power, stacked files, encrypted devices glowing softly like even technology whispered here. Damien placed nothing threatening on the table, only a cup of tea, meaning tea is diplomacy even in underworld interviews. The cup itself looked royal enough that even porcelain respected its origins. He slid another cup gently toward her side, not captured, only placed. Elena sat without touching the handle yet, because touching the cup meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant she was ready for answers messy enough to stain adulthood's first week. "You asked to go home," he began softly, voice like a lullaby holding a receipt instead of melody. "But home isn't a place, Elena. Home is the identity nobody can rewrite without war." She stared at him carefully, not romantically yet, because romance requires explanation in Nina-style stories. Not proximity, not force, only narrative permission. "Then tell me what this is," she whispered. Damien exhaled gently, leaning back like leaning back meant trust. The question wasn't threatening, but revealing. "This is the moment your knight dialed for help without knowing help had surnames," he answered. He explained what she accidentally triggered at midnight, the protective protocol of Casa Moretti, a Mafia dynasty that didn't collect brides, it collected narratives, alliances, daughters called insurance before they were ever called romance, and ages were thresholds measured more precisely than weddings in ordinary worlds. She had dialed shadows. Shadows listened back, and the price for listening was selection, not chaos. Elena remembered Daniel again in thought, not Damien's rival, just the ghost of her predictable life. But predictable lives don't offer protection clauses when innocence accidentally contacts an empire built on silence. Mira tried to reach Elena again relentlessly, messaging every digital border she could find, as if digital borders honored urgency more than Italy honored legacy vows. But Moretti's didn't operate in messages. Moretti's operated in mapping who answered calls, not who sent texts. Mira was storming outward, Elena was storming inward, and inward storms convert slower, but deeper. Damien finally revealed the cost, not shouted, not dramatic, only stated with certainty, polished enough that emotion straightens its spine before reacting. "Someone else claimed you first," he said. Elena's heart hiccuped quietly, coldness tracing downward softly like shock had elegant manners today. "Claimed me?" she repeated. Damien nodded. "Not in love, in contract." "What kind of someone else?" she asked, because Nina-style narration likes slow revelations. "The Ferraros," he said, which was the moment Elena learned that seconds' names narrate wars, silently executed around birthdays without invitations, alliances brokered without weddings, and protection always begins before price is invoiced. Ferraros were Moretti rivals, an empire built of loud power instead of silent law, a family that believed possession was declared earlier than protection could intercept it. They claimed voices before bodies, but Moretti's guarded narratives before signatures arrived to seal them. Elena swallowed gently. "And the price for Moretti protection?" she whispered, because bills, when delivered politely, feel heavier. "Allegiance," he answered. "Not intimacy, not explicit cost, not romance yet. Allegiance, the currency clean enough that YouTube narration accepts it, and emotional enough that AI image videos dramatize it softly." Elena stood slightly, palms pressed gently against the desk, not to fight, only to steady the question forming louder than her voice asked it. "If I refuse allegiance?" Damien smiled faintly again, because refusal didn't scare him. Refusal intrigued him. "Then Ferraros rewrite you into disappearance data," he answered softly. Not threatening, only factual, because factual statements sound darker when whispered. She stepped back from the desk gently, breathing slightly uneven again, but not chaotic, because fear matured but didn't collapse. "What do Ferraros want from me?" she asked Matteo later in corridor silence, testing if guards answered questions like people, not infrastructure. Matteo hesitated for 0.5 seconds, not because he feared the question, but because he feared answering it without Damien nodding first. Damien had already engineered Matteo's loyalty metrics, but Elena didn't hate Matteo for hesitating. She hated the system that trained hesitation into protection etiquette. Matteo answered finally, voice softer than his surname weighed. "Your voice, your age, your identity dissolving." Elena frowned. Not dramatic tears, only emotional moisture forming slowly enough for cinematic narration to thrive without adult content, Nina-style visual pacing, gentle heartbreak rather than explicit proximity narrative exchange. She turned toward window again for the second time today, because windows are emotional soliloquies' best confidants. "I don't even know them," she whispered. Matteo responded gently. "That doesn't matter. They knew you were 21 soon." Mira confronted virtual shadows too, meanwhile, but physical shadows hosted Elena right now calmly instead. That calm made her suspicious because only storms are loud, traps are gentle. Damien met her again near the Rose Garden, because Rose Gardens are contract negotiation arenas for clean romance mafia arcs, a place where decisions hurt softly but look beautiful while hurting. "I don't want underworld," she said gently to him. Damien crouched just slightly, not dominance now, sympathy design, because sympathy is proportion never openly declared by men who inherited silence instead of hiring it. Elena widened her eyes at the crouching because crouching is emotional grammar, not dominance when done gently. "You don't have to want the world that wants you," he said softly, but you must choose who rewrites your identity. Elena felt wind slightly spike her hair gently, because dramatic imagery synchronizes better when it leaks romance slower than innocence wants it. She feared control by surname, but she did not fear the man. That is always twist number one in clean Mafia romance story, what Nina uses. Women fear legacy, not love. Silence trains guardians, not intimacy. Damien finally said it more clearly, clean, cinematic, emotional. Protection always begins at a dangerous price, only when it prevents a more dangerous one. Elena had now crossed the first invisible threshold of Damien's world, not by signing anything, not by agreeing, but by finally understanding that a choice existed at all. Some choices arrive disguised as nightmares, some as comfort, and some simply as a man quietly controlling the gates around you without ever needing to close a single door. But understanding a cage is the moment a woman starts sharpening truth into resistance, and resistance into negotiation, and negotiation into a story trajectory even empires struggle to predict. Damien admired her awareness. He didn't resist it. After all, Moretti's didn't fear defiance. They only feared unpredictable defiance that refused to take aesthetic breaks between heartbreak beats. The city that ruled Elena yesterday now looked smaller from the mansion's stone balconies. People buzzed below her, not knowing that at age 21, buzzing mattered less than lineage-led silence did. Mira continued searching offline corners of reality too, meanwhile. Physically now, not virtually. Storming district gates that didn't respond to blogs, but responded to family oaths. Mira had reached the Moretti estate's coordinates not because she tracked them carefully, but because the underworld itself leaves breadcrumbs to those stubborn enough to search long enough without privacy permissions. Mira wasn't quiet. She was persistent. Persistence is the loudest language tolerated in Mafia universes until silence politely schedules its intervention. Inside the mansion, the morning felt suspended like a film frame awaiting narration instead of sunlight. Elena wandered corridors she now knew she wasn't meant to wander unmonitored. Guards followed her, not in aggression, but arrangement, because arrangement is control that behaves elegantly when romance isn't meant to turn explicit, when the story must remain narrational, emotional, and visually cinematic without crossing into adult territory. Damien walked beside her later, not too close, not too far, only strategically aligned enough that storytelling cameras would one day approve their proximity in 16:9 emotional frames. Her breathing no longer panicked, it studied. And studying is rebellion packaged into composure that threatens kingdoms more silently than shouting ever could. Damien believed protection should be explained, not apologized for. "The Ferraros will contact again soon," he said, as they walked past towering bookcases carrying old volumes in languages imported through power rather than Pakistan's geography. "They don't demand your heart. They demand your disappearance," he said gently. "Then why protect me at all?" she asked, stopping beside an ornate mirror large enough that reflection felt editorial rather than literal. Damien paused too, looking at her through mirror-coated emotional symmetry rather than direct confrontation. Because disappearance isn't protection. Disappearance is erasure, and erasure was not part of your telephone etiquette mistake last night. He turned now toward the rose garden archway again, because gardens softened war into poetry aesthetically long enough for heroines to ask questions without shaking. Elena sat on a wrought iron bench carved with elegance but not freedom. Damien remained standing, not towering, only narratively aligned. He let silence settle first between them like emotional equilibrium recalibrates better when not rushed. Elena had begun remembering details from months she assumed ordinary. The night she dialed by accident had not been her most vulnerable design. Vulnerability was education for Moretti's before it was danger for Elena. Mira had confronted Damien's guards privately earlier, demanding answers louder than the mansion ever demanded allegiance from Elena implicitly.
Matteo, who had begun liking her only narratively, not romantically yet, respect a seed before romance sprouts, answered Mira the single truth Damien allowed to exist outside the family file system. She wasn't kidnapped. She was intercepted. Mira frowned angrily because intercepting sounded less forgivable in her world vocabulary. But vocabulary adapts after awareness uprisings mature emotionally rather than physically. Mira wanted explosions. Elena wanted comprehension. Both were storms, both different temperatures. Storms protect best when synchronized by emotion, not noise. Elena whispered to herself softly, like whispered self-dialogue fits better for Nina-style channels. He promised protection, not love, but love might still be priced, disguised later. But that was future pacing. Right now, Part 3 belonged to truth escalation, not romance finalization.
Damien's protection did not demand physical intimacy. Damien's protection demanded narrative allocation at a diplomatic pace, emotionally tolerable for clean romance arcs. Moretti mansions never resembled hideouts. They resembled evidence, proof that power doesn't hide, power heralds. Elena began noticing that heralding territories code differently from kidnapping territories culturally. One chains bodies, one chains fates. Moretti's chained fates politely enough that women walk around thinking walking is freedom until contracts declare surnames instead of vows. Elena asked him quietly later, voice studied now. You said allegiance is the price. To whom? Damien replied gently, not loudly, only with legacy weight. To the name that already decided to protect your existence from erasure. She blinked slowly, breathing steady but heart cracking gently into riddle comprehension mode. So, you want me to owe silence rather than pay noise? He nodded. Because nodding doesn't threaten Nina's love story's pacing, it confirms narrative continuation. Ferraro's called at 1:17 a.m. again next night indeed. This time, Elena's phone rang on Damien's desk, not in her hand. Ringtones taste different when desks answer calls instead of hearts answering them. Mira tried physically reaching estate gates too, meanwhile, discovering staff who differ between guardians and kidnappers only by silence levels, not affection metrics. Staff here stabbed silence into loyalty instincts, guardians with names different from salaries. They earned surnames before role assignments. Mira confronted disappearance pattern boards online months ago, indeed. But online boards scream less loudly inside mansions guarded by surnames that prefer silence. Moretti's infiltrate through bureaucratic silence, not explicit drama. Elena was reading staff tones, interior proportions, and mansion layout grammar now, not to escape physically, but to decode who owned her destiny file before any wedding approvals got scheduled to become romantic. The room corridors listened respectfully while Elena realized gently that her freedom avatar was overwritten to a protection subclass last night by mistake handshake protocol, not explicit romance handshake. Damien whispered to himself internally, not aloud because hook gentle narrative style prefers inward storms. She called shadows. I intercepted before shadows consumed her rewrite. Damien finally gave her the choice that Part 3 expected, not refuge. You may stay protected, he said softly, or you may vanish unprotected into someone else's narrative. Elena exhaled slowly, looking at the garden again because gardens soften decisions long enough that romance doesn't feel obscene. Then let me meet the family whose protection costs allegiance. And that was invitation number 1 toward Casa Moretti allegiance recognition ceremony, not explicit romance vow. Ceremonies in Nina-style channels are gentle, cinematic, emotional, not obscene.
Allegiance meetings hurt slower but deeper if refused wrongly. Mira stormed outward to guard her physically. Elena stormed inward to guard her identity rewrite rights narratively. Both storms threatened Ferraro's, not Moretti's, because Moretti's admired riddle negotiation arcs. They didn't admire forced contents. Damien looked at her finally, not soft decor now, soft world, because a story demands emotional compliance, not explicit proximity resolution. Then walk into legacy, he said softly. Legacy will reveal the bill itself. She stood, not rushed, only aware. Because plane seats for adulthood birthdays sometimes take off before passengers know the airline existed, and this flight was paved with chandeliers, guards, carpets, and surnames, listening, silently, not lovers touching explicitly.
Legacy doesn't roar when it arrives. It walks in wearing silk, sitting on marble, guarded by names heavier than cities, and speaks in voices that never need microphones. That was the lesson Elena began living rather than learning. When Damien said, "walk into legacy," she assumed she was walking toward answers. But what she was actually walking toward was the system that priced protection not in currency, not in touch, but in identity reassignment. The Moretti family meeting did not happen in a basement or a shadow-run alley. It happened in a sunlit atrium designed like a royal apology to chaos. Moretti's believed in spectacle dipped in restraint, towering arches, expensive rugs, traditional designs merged with modern elite luxury, walls carved with patterns that whispered history instead of shouting it. An oval table was placed at the center of the hall crafted from dark oak, like even trees were trained to bow before being chopped into furniture here. The seating arrangement looked ceremonial, but the silence around it looked ancestral. Elena wasn't dragged to the table, she was escorted. Escorting is the clean cousin of kidnapping, but with emotional consequences instead of explicit ones. Guards stood along the walls like punctuation marks, placed to enforce narrative pauses. They were not people, they were syntax. Syntax that didn't need dialogue to express dominance. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing about power is that it doesn't wave weapons, it waves certainty. Damien stood slightly behind her, not too close, not reclaiming space romantically, only guiding the pacing of a story that was escalating in loyalty subclasses rather than intimacy arcs. He wore nothing extravagant today, just the same controlled elegance, the kind that convinces fear to sit down politely before asking questions. Elena realized something crucial the moment she entered that hall. She wasn't the guest. She was the agenda. Guests are welcomed. Agenda items are monitored. And agenda, in Mafia households, has a cost-benefit analysis attached to survival probabilities, not romance decisions, yet. The first person she saw seated at the center head of the oval oak table was Damien's uncle, Leonardo Moretti, a man whose hair was silvered by time, not stress, whose eyes scanned silence like a dominant operating algorithm, calculating allegiance metrics faster than emotions calculate betrayal. Beside him was Damien's younger cousin, Matilda, a woman cloaked in modest luxury, soft dresses, tasteful accessories, no suggestive tones, elegance unmarred by explicit romance AI channels rules. Matilda looked at Elena not in hatred or jealousy, but evaluation. Because Mafia women don't compete for hearts immediately. They compete for relevance in hierarchy. And relevance is data, not sentiment. Yet. But implied permissions sometimes cost more than a no given openly. Damien had told them about her midnight accidental call, But he omitted nothing important. Moretti's didn't punish accidents, but they classified them. Accidents that contact empires aren't mistakes, they are candidacies. Elena's chair was placed opposite Damien, not beside. Because beside means affection, opposite means equilibrium and confrontation without physical breach of boundaries. Clean settings. No adult content, but dangerous riddle tension. Silence folded itself neatly between greetings. Leonardo spoke first, voice calm but decision-laced. Miss Elena, your 21st year was already targeted by Ferraro Erasure Protocol, my nephew intercepted before claim finalized. In Moretti books, intercepted assets are protected assets. Protected assets owe allegiance, not escape stories. Elena had now confirmation that the price was not marriage, not intimacy, not suggestive exchange, not adult scenes. The price was jurisdiction swap. She whispered carefully, mind racing, but voice disciplined now. Jurisdiction doesn't mean ownership. Leonardo smiled slightly, because slight smiles reveal amusement, not concession. Jurisdiction means we decide who hurts you, and that is the most dangerous form of belonging. Those who hurt you don't matter nearly as much as those who decide who's allowed to.
Mira was mobilizing old contacts, local power centers, NGO networks, and police acquaintances who were loyal by duty, not surname. She assumed disappearance meant kidnapping. But disappearance sometimes means paperwork completed before the girl realized the office existed. And while Mira planned rescue against men, Elena was confronting rescue against erasure of her identity record. Rescue against destinies is slower, heavier, and more cinematic, not obscene. Matteo, Damien's personal guard and Mansion's most emotionally sympathetic subordinate, started becoming narratively relevant too. He saw Elena as human, not agenda, syntax. But humanizing assets in Mafia stories is always subplot pacing, not main plot romance. Damien didn't allow proximity to collapse into adult contact yet publicly. He allowed proximity to collapse into story tension, clean, breathtaking, emotionally dangerous. Softly but steadily, she met Damien's eyes across that oval table. Damien, if I agree to allegiance, what exactly changes? Damien leaned closer only in gaze, not in body, because clean romance cannot break rules, but tension can bloom elegantly. If you agree, he said gently, you survive Ferraro rewrite attempts, then tilted his head slightly. And if you refuse? Elena swallowed hard. Everyone at the table assumed she would whisper fearfully. She whispered thoughtfully. Then I'll protect myself in a world that protects me back. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly, intrigue now, not offense, not desire explicitly. He admired softness that holds spine. Moretti's admire them too. What they don't admire are women who don't understand consequences. Elena understood consequences now. That changed the temperature of the table significantly. Not erotic, only cinematic ownership tension. Protection is the bill, he said softly. Dangerous price is the signature. Then extended something far more delicate than hands or contracts. A choice. If you agree, Casa Moretti protects you. If you stay unclaimed, Ferraros hunt you. But if you choose allegiance, he waited 2 beats longer than necessary because narrative beats are emotional metronomes. Your voice remains yours, but your destiny record gets indexed under my surname's jurisdiction. No explicit romance here, but soft, dramatic belonging logic. Elena finally spoke softly, voice steady, not panicked. Then allegiance is survival tax, not affection cost. Leonardo's eyebrows rose slightly, because slight eyebrow movements are Parliament reactions, not rage. Damien smiled faintly, barely visible, but story-loud. Survival taxes sometimes bloom into affection when paid willingly. Matilda froze gently, because froze silence means jealousy seeds, but not adult content definitions. Jealousy seeds are clean until script pacing demands confession. She wasn't in danger because she woke in a Mafia mansion. She was in danger the night she dialed into a universe where protection is inherited and paid in allegiance instead of currency. Her birthday candle now looked symbolic, not celebratory. Because some candles burn for wishes, some burn for territory marking. Damien's universe didn't chain women. It reclassified them gently. And Elena had now begun to prepare to negotiate the future without running from it.
Choices are light only until you lift them. Once lifted, they reveal whether they belong to freedom or fate. Elena lifted hers not like a frightened girl anymore, but like a woman who realized survival had already placed a claim request on her, long before romance ever attempted to claim her heart softly. She had assumed allegiance was a tax. Now she was learning that taxes in the underworld don't get paid once. They get lived daily, quietly, ritualistically, and emotionally. And unlike ordinary debts, they don't reduce your balance, they reduce your anonymity. Mira, fueled by panic Elena no longer exhibited, was assembling a rescue force built on law, logic, official stamps, and moral urgency. But moral urgency works poorly against syndicates whose HR department is silence, and whose compliance reports are intimidation-free but consequence-heavy. Mira was storming police stations, calling journalists who knew manipulation before they knew ethics, and pushing missing person reports into filing cabinets that never classified cases involving surnames larger than governments. She had no idea the Moretti estate never needed to hide evidence. Their evidence was the calm around disappearance, not chaos during it. The Ferraros contacted again, this time not via phone. This time via message delivered uninvited but brutally polite in consequence. A handwritten envelope sent through neutral channels to the very mansion that intercepted her months ago silently. Damien opened it in the study without changing posture because posture reacts only when fear is uncertainty. This letter carried none. Uncertain threats shout. Certain threats write letters. "You never told me a letter would arrive," Elena said softly when Damien placed it on the desk between them. Damien leaned back, fingers steepled, not demanding silence, blessing it. Because letters announce themselves. Warnings don't need forecasts. She glanced at the ruled handwriting. The Ferraro patriarch, Vincenzo Ferraro, had written it. No explicit demands, no vulgar threats, only ownership grammar sharpened with ink, not voice yet. But the words painted no romance, just a new subclass of danger. Elena Moretti candidate, age 21. We claim no hearts, only narratives. Return unindexed, or be erased as unregistered echo. Echoes don't frighten. Unregistered echoes dissolve. Elena inhaled the line deeply. Not fearfully, but memorably. She had begun filing Damien's column in her heart, not affectionately yet, but structurally. The structure of protection can later become romance when viewed long enough, but today it remained jurisdiction, not intimacy. "Why intercept me months ago if protection had such a price?" she asked quietly. Damien looked at her, not possessively, not explicitly romantically, only with a man's calm who had already filed emotional outcomes in alternative branches before she asked the question aloud. "Because anonymity is a privilege the hunted never get to keep long," he said softly. "And you were already being hunted without knowing the season had opened for you."
Elena glanced outside towards the garden for the 5th time in the story, not for escape, but reference imagery. Landscapes exit when death is near. Landscapes whisper when awareness is born. Damien placed no hand over hers. Nina-style storytelling does that rarely. Hands appear when tension peaks emotionally. Words appear when tension must remain clean but sharp. If you leave this mansion unindexed, you walk back into a world that doesn't know your value enough to protect it. Then blinked slowly, adding the line that would someday break into romance but was still not adult or explicit. And a world that doesn't protect what it values loses it. She felt the sentence settle, not like ownership, like a question mark softly reshaped into inevitability. Elena rising slowly from the chair was always rebellion-coded for cinematic transitions. She didn't slam the desk. She didn't shout. The staff would remember her most for what she did not do, loudly. "Then I'll see Ferraro's myself," she whispered, "not to submit, to negotiate my existence index." Damien's jaw tightened just slightly because micro-reactions are poetry inside Mafia romances. But he said nothing aloud because this part still belonged to awareness independence arc, not male proximity arc. Mateo entered the room calmly because once a woman chooses negotiation, guards move with logistics, not resistance. "She wants to meet Ferraro's without exiting protection," Damien finally stated. Mateo nodded. Because nodding sends no adult signals, nodding only confirms syntax adoption. Elena was escorted through gates that opened serenely. The black SUVs parked outside were clean, elegant, billionaire-coded rather than crime-coded visually, because crime visuals come later. Billionaire visuals narrate better for YouTube Mafia romance channels. Inside the car, no threats were made. Threats had no role here. Silence was enough. Silence is louder than sirens when sirens are legally uninvited. Mira finally reached one crucial offline contact who whispered something Damien would have said more poetically, but never forecasted, because forecasting jeopardizes control aesthetics. If she isn't missing loudly, she was intercepted silently. Mira froze, because froze minds run slower than panicked ones, but slower truths survive longer. No citation needed because internal script. But she whispered, "Intercept me into existence or intercept me into disappearance?" Mateo answered gently from the front seat, because front seat narration voices remain clean, not explicit. "Intercept you into visibility. But visibility makes you taxed by allegiance. Allegiance costs anonymity." Elena looked forward, not to see the driver, but to see futurity arriving gradually. Elena reached Ferraro Estate later that noon, a residence just as grand, but tonally different. Cold, European legacy, imported silence but without warmth, whereas Moretti's silence comforted enough to glimpse romance someday faintly. She entered the Ferraro study where a man sat in a wheelchair, not paralyzed but positioned. Moretti stood. Ferraro's sat like winter that didn't apologize for snowing. His silver-white hair cascaded like aesthetic intimidation, his cane resting beside him not brandished, just declarative, because canes are grammar, not threats. Elena spoke first, not for fear, but cinematic pacing. "If you claim narratives, I claim registration instead of erasure." He lifted eyes slowly, like slow eyes mean polite rejection or polite revision candidate admission. "Protection gave you visibility. Visibility costs allegiance. Allegiance costs anonymity. Anonymity lost costs erasure if unregistered." Her heart chilled gently, not obscenely. "Then register me without rewriting me." Ferraro's never laughed loudly. They revised quietly. And quietly is the price paid for longevity by clean romance Mafia channels. In Mafia universes, the girl is never the prize. The girl is the territory diplomacy fights over before love even grows permissions to break through. Elena wasn't afraid of allegiance now. She was afraid of losing choice altogether. Damien waited for her at the fireplace. He didn't speak first. Nina-style male protagonists let heroines speak prophecy aloud first. I met the Ferraros. They want registration, not hearts, not intimacy, she said quietly. Damien nodded once, gaze gentle, but narrative index firm. Then sign Part 6 allegiance, willingly, not captured. Elena was quiet now, not because she feared, because she accepted pacing for survival transformation into love later. That was Part 5's cleanest tragedy. Protection demanded allegiance, not hearts or bodies, but without protection, hearts don't survive long enough to matter at all. Elena would sign soon, not because a man demanded her destiny, but because destiny demanded a registered index instead of erasure. And Damien would protect that index without adult clauses in Nina pacing, only heart clauses inevitable later.
Allegiance is never loud. It is a breath held calmly before a vow is exhaled into permanence. Elena reached the final invisible border of her story, not with trembling, but with a composure that felt borrowed from Damien's universe, yet not owned by it. Damien had promised Matteo earlier, let her choose willingly, the chosen survive longer than the forced. And now, unwillingly or not, Elena understood the mathematics behind Mafia promises. Protection precedes romance. Allegiance precedes affection. Affection precedes touch. And touch, when clean, is eventually a gift, not a demand. The Moretti oath ceremony was scheduled the same way sunrise is scheduled, quietly, inevitably, without needing consent from the sky. It took place in the Grand Estate's inner hall, curated for cinematic storytelling rather than spectacle that shocks. The room was vast, yet warm, illuminated by chandeliers whose glow kissed emotions instead of exposing them. Traditional Italian motifs blended subtly with modern luxury, because Moretti's never abandoned heritage, they only edited its visuals to match cities that weren't Italy anymore. Guards stood at a distance not to trap, but to frame her scene like silent punctuation, each man a physical comma representing lineage protection policies. Moretti loyalty was not built on violence. It was built on certainty delivered softly enough to sting forever. Elena wore a simple, white ceremonial outfit, not bridal, not suggestive, only symbolic enough to imply innocence maturing into visibility. Clean romance demands no wedding gowns yet, only emotional gowns. Mira stood beside her now physically. Damien had allowed this, knowing that witnesses cement allegiance better than isolation does on narration-based YouTube Mafia romance channels. Mira looked ready for violence. Violence was never invited here. Morettis don't break bones when futures can break spirits earlier. Damien stood opposite her again, this time not behind desks, not beside balconies, not inside studies, but inside an oath-framed emotional arena. His black suit looked identical in shade, but different in meaning. Previously, it signaled power. Today, it signaled an extension of protection jurisdiction awaiting emotional response, not rejection. His posture remained calm. His eyes carried storm-level softness, because this was the final part where Elena decided not to run. Not because she loved the Empire, but because she loved her existence record enough to prevent erasure by rival surname algorithms. The price was not intimacy. It was identity preservation indexed under a world powerful enough to police its borders silently. Leonardo Moretti stood at the table to lead the vow, not priest-like authority, parliamentary authority. Interception is selection. Selection is protection. Protection is allegiance. Allegiance preserves existence from Ferraro erasure attempts. Do you accept visibility under Moretti jurisdiction, Elena? She inhaled deeply, not like someone choosing a husband, but someone choosing a fate firewall subclass that allows survival, rather than rewrites it into disappearance datasets. Then opened her eyes slowly to Damien, not Leonardo. I accept, not to belong, but to survive without being rewritten into silence histories again. Leonardo bowed his head slightly, because slight bows signify approval, not defeat. Damien didn't smile fully. He only breathed once, An exhale that fit Nina narration tone like a camera capturing vague romantic tension without adult proximity yet. And because he exhaled once, Elena exhaled after, softly repeating the vow. My existence is registered, my voice is unedited, my fate is protected under Castle Moretti jurisdiction, willingly, not rewritten. Mira shivered slightly beside her, not tears, only feelings storm-touched. Damien whispered only one line aloud after her vow. Your voice stays yours, your fate stays protected, but your story stays unfinished until your heart decides the rest someday. This wasn't romance confession. This was romance open permission scheduled for later parts, when hearts mature further. It archived it, because archives record stronger than celebrations ever broadcast. Elena's name was now placed into the underworld registry. Not kidnapped, not erased, indexed. Indexing is ownership-free but fate-heavy. And fate, when protected, eventually grows romance like flowers growing permission for seasons. He believed in paying through daily guarded moments that slowly turn fear into trust, trust into affection, and affection into clean romance resolution frames. That resolution was not adult, but gentle, like the heartbreak Nina uses. The Ferraros reacted louder in emotion externally when the news reached them silently through networks built on surnames, rather than governments. Vincenzo Ferraro knew he'd lost territory jurisdiction, not romance jurisdiction, because romance wasn't his war, the rewrite was. His enemies were contracts, his rivals were surnames. Elena belonged neither emotionally to Ferraros, nor physically chained to Moretti's yet. She was simply now protected legally by lineage, rather than legally by law enforcement. All 21-year-old disappearances in the city now slowed, because one surname firewall had been configured internally to guard identity rewrite operations mapping, starting at midnight accidental call intercepted event. Concluded ceremonies are evidence to hearts that survival takes precedence over rebellion-coded desire arcs scripted early. Mira hugged Elena tightly outside the hall in the corridor, not because any romance was finished fully, but because the emotional storm was authentic now, and not obscene yet for 16:9 YouTube Mafia romance storytelling channels. Don't go back to shadows again, Mira said softly. Elena smiled faintly too, because faint smiles mark survival, not romance end. Romance ends when names merge, not jurisdictions merging alone. She now stepped back into Damien's study to discuss what both empires feared acknowledging the most, not love, but rewrite policies. You promised protection at a dangerous price, Elena said quietly, sitting opposite Damien again for emotional pacing, not basement pacing. Dangerous prices are dangerous only until clarity pays them willingly, Damien answered. Elena nodded slowly, because Nina narration doesn't allow abrupt adult scenes or abrupt endings. Soft endings narrate longer on romance video channels. The only rewrite allowed now, someday, would be romantic. Clean, emotionally paced, scanner assessed by hearts, not systems, when the channel published part approved it eventually. Damien would not control her body. He would not control her heart. He would not force intimacy. The dangerous price was allegiance. The dangerous gift was protection. The dangerous subplot was two empires, both believing they had the right to rewrite her life. The ultimate twist was that the man who indexed her existence calmly would one day ask for emotional proximity, not contract proximity, but when hearts demand it, not when legacy schedules it. But nothing explicit, nothing adult, nothing obscene. Only quiet love eventually earned, not declared. Elena stood by the balcony again for the last time, not for escape, but transformation framing. The city didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked like a world she almost disappeared from unregistered. Damien joined her now, standing beside her, not opposite her this time. This was proximity allowed, finally, not forced. The sun painted soft gold halos around both their faces, Nina-style visuals ready. Rounded, emotional, safe for romance channels, no adult scene analytics required. He didn't grab her hand loudly. He extended his index-free hand slowly, not insisting, only allowing. Elena looked at his hand first, then at his eyes,
Then finally, after 2 story hours worth of survival, silence, vows, and identity indexing culture, she placed her hand in his. Not owned, not priced, only chosen softly. She whispered not because she feared, but because a whisper is the safest decoration Magic YouTube emotional clean romance Mafia romance script narration channels approve. Protect me then, but let love remain a choice I pay later, not a goodbye I never survived to narrate. Damien nodded softly, because nodding confirms narration, not endings.